Have you been looking to get a pet bearded dragon, or already have one and just want to learn more about their care? Well, in today's video, we're going to be teaching you everything you need to know of how to take care of your beautiful bearded dragon. My name is Josh, and you're watching Lizard Wizard Reptiles. Bearded dragons are a very awesome species of lizard. They come from Australia, from dry forest areas and brushlands. So they're gonna like it very hot and very dry, which we're gonna get more into later. But if you're thinking about getting a bearded dragon, the first thing you need to know is how big do they get. So this is our smallest girl we have right now. She's about 6 months old, and she is already about 13 to 15 inches right now. So we're actually going to grab out some other bearded dragons to show you what they reach when they get to full adult size. So this is one of our adult bearded dragons, and he's honestly pretty big already, but he's reached about average size for bearded dragons. For bearded dragons, they say average size is reaching from 18 inches to 24 inches long. So this guy is about 19 inches long, but you can see it's a fairly large lizard, so you're gonna need a fairly large living place to house them so they have plenty of room to climb and bask and roam around. But now we're actually going to show you our biggest bearded dragon to show you that some of them can go over the average. And here we have our biggest guy, Clifford. And Clifford is right around the highest of the average that you can get. He's about 22 to 24 inches right now. He's very hefty too. He's weighing in at around 600 grams right now, which is very large for a bearded dragon. So this is just to show you that they can get very large, and you're going to need a substantial size home for them to live in. Now that you know how big they're going to get, we're going to move into the next part of the care guide, which is going to be housing. So when you're housing your bearded dragon, we recommend that they go in at least a 4x2x2 enclosure as adults. This will give them plenty of room to climb, bask, hide when they want to, get to a warm or cold side of the enclosure. Also, as far as enclosure goes, you're only going to want to house one adult bearded dragon per enclosure. Adult bearded dragons can be very territorial and very aggressive to other cage mates. So you're going to want to make sure that you're keeping them in an enclosure by themselves when they're adults. The only time we would recommend that you actually change this is if you're trying to breed them. You're obviously going to have to put them in the same enclosure for a certain amount of time, but during that time, we keep a very close eye on them and make sure that they're not fighting or not hurting each other, because it is very possible for you to come back to a bearded dragon with a missing limb or even potentially dead, and we don't want that. So make sure that, especially if you're just keeping them as pets, to only house one bearded dragon in an enclosure at one time. And the last thing you're going to want to know for the enclosure is to make sure that the enclosure has enough ventilation. If the enclosure doesn't have enough ventilation, your animal could overheat with the power of heat bulbs that you're using. So you want to make sure it's well ventilated. Also, this will help keep the humidity down, which we're going to be talking about later in the video. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is what kind of substrate to put your bearded dragon on. So this is going to be the bedding that they're going to be climbing over. So for baby bearded dragons, we would recommend starting them out on something like paper towel or even ceramic tile, because this is something that they can't ingest. And if they ingest that loose substrate as babies, it could lead to things like impactions or even respiratory infections and things like that. So when they're babies, you don't want to use loose substrate. But once they get a little bit older, a little bit more sturdier, they're not going to be eating their substrate unless they already have some kind of illness, which you're going to want to keep an eye out for illnesses in your bearded dragon. But what we recommend for substrate, there's a lot of different things you can use, things from the pet store that you can pick up, but we don't recommend that just because a lot of the stuff you're going to get at a pet store is going to be the same thing that you can get at your local hardware store. So what we recommend for adult bearded dragons is a 50-50 mix of organic topsoil and all natural play sand. As long as you make sure that it's organic topsoil and all natural play sand, you should be fine. You just want to mix the two together really well, and it'll create a beautiful substrate like this that we're about to show you. I think for bearded dragons that the best thing to use is this substrate because it gives them chances to dig, burrow, and things like that, and just live their life like they would naturally out in the desert. The next thing we're going to talk about is lighting. So first off, we're going to start with UVB lighting. UVB lighting is very, very important to your bearded dragon's health. If they do not have substantial UVB lighting, they could develop metabolic bone disease, other diseases as well, and they just may not grow right because they need UVB rays to grow and to strengthen their bones and to help with their calcium. So as far as UVB lighting, you're not going to want to go with just the small coil bulbs that you can pick up at any pet store. Those are not going to put off enough UV rays to keep your bearded dragon healthy. So what we would recommend instead, and we're about to show it to you, is at least a T5 or better long UVB bulb that can spread across the entirety of the enclosure and give them UV rays whether they're on the hot side or the cool side. So also with UVB lighting, we would recommend that you actually hang it inside of the enclosure because if you have screen tops, sometimes screen tops can take away from some of the UVB output of your bulb, and you want to make sure that they can get close to it and have enough UVB to stay healthy. Most of the time with UVB lights, they recommend changing them out once every 6 months just to be safe, to make sure that they're still putting off UVB rays. UVB bulbs can run out of UV rays but still produce light, so you don't want to wait until that light is burnt out. You want to go ahead and change it early on. Or you can do what we do and get yourself a solar meter. Solar meters are really good for this because the UV rays in the bulb can last quite a long time if you're actually reading it with the solar meter. If the solar meter says at least 2.0 or higher at the spot that they're going to be basking, then you should be fine to not replace that bulb until it gets below that 2.0 threshold. The solar meter is very expensive, but this will actually save you a lot of money down the road because these UVB bulbs are very expensive, and if you're replacing them every 6 months, you're going to be spending a lot more than you actually would on that solar meter. So we recommend getting a solar meter because you could even keep your bulbs for a lot longer, say a year up to 2 years, just as long as that bulb is still putting off UV rays. The next thing we're going to be talking about is heating your bearded dragon. So you're going to want to have a heat bulb in the enclosure. This is not quite as important as the UVB bulb, but it is still very important to your bearded dragon's health. When they have heat, it helps them digest their food properly and keep them from having impactions and other health issues in the future. You also are going to want to have a cool side and a hot side of the enclosure so that way they can get away from the heat if they want to, or when it's time to bask, when they need to digest their food, they can go up and hang out by the heat lamp. Now, the wattage of the heat lamp that you're going to use is going to very much depend on how far away it is going to be from the basking spot and just what temperature your actual room or facility that you're keeping your bearded dragons in is at the current time. So what works for us is we use, depending on the enclosure, between a 60 watt bulb and a 75 watt bulb. And this is going to help ensure that your bearded dragons have enough heat. The next thing we're going to be talking about is temperature and humidity. So the temperature in your enclosure needs to be a temperature gradient. Now what this means is that they're going to have one spot of the enclosure that is as hot as you need it to where they can go bask and digest their food properly, and then they need one side of the enclosure that is cooler where they can get away and cool down. The hot side of the enclosure gradient that you're going to want to have, and you're going to want to get you an infrared heat gun to read this, because this is the best way to tell the actual temperature of the surface of the basking zone. So you're going to want it to read on the hottest side around 105, and then you're going to want that to let that be a gradient on the hot side all the way down to about 90 degrees. Now some people say you can go up to 110 degrees, but we've realized for us that 105 degrees works very well for our bearded dragons and keeps them very energetic and very healthy. Now, as far as the cool side of the enclosure goes, you're still going to want a gradient, but the gradient is going to be just in between 70 degrees and about 85 degrees. So it's just a place where they can go and cool down. At nighttime though, you are going to want to have a nighttime drop, and you won't need any nighttime heating unless your house gets below 65 degrees at night. But if your house does get below that at night, you're going to want to make sure that you have they're ceramic heat emitters, so they're going to emit heat but no light. So this is something you can use at nighttime if your house does get a little bit too cold for them. So now we're going to talk about humidity for bearded dragons. So bearded dragons do not need it very humid. Like as we said, they come from dry deserts, so their humidity is going to be anywhere from 20% up to 50%, but you're not going to want to get it any higher than 50% because this can also lead to illnesses and respiratory infections and other things like that. So all you need to really do for that is get a humidity gauge of any kind, really, put it inside of the enclosure to read the humidity. Also, if you're having troubles keeping your humidity down, definitely that halogen heat bulb that you're using for them to warm them up should suck all of that moisture out of the air and make the environment drier for them, just to keep them happy and healthy. Okay, now we're going to be talking about the diet for your bearded dragon. What are they going to eat? So, bearded dragons are omnivores, meaning that they eat both plants and protein. So, as far as protein goes, we feed them on a varied diet of dubia roaches, crickets, mealworms, and even hornworms as an occasional treat. You only want to give hornworms as an occasional treat because they can be very fatty and very high in water content, which can also make your bearded dragon sick, but they are very good for them in small amounts. So if you give it to them as a treat every once in a while, that would be good. Then we're going to talk about the type of greens that they eat. So as far as greens, the ones that we recommend most of all, just because they're already high in calcium, is going to be collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, and dandelion greens. These are all going to be some of the best greens that you can feed your bearded dragon and some of the most healthy ones. On top of all of that, with all the bugs, all the salads, you're going to want to dust them with a calcium powder, because this is also going to keep them healthy and keep them from getting metabolic bone disease. If you don't know what metabolic bone disease, I know we've mentioned it a couple times. It is a disease, a disease that they can get where their bones don't grow properly, and they're going to be misshapen, and a lot of times it's hard for these bearded dragons to even walk around. So you're going to want to make sure you have plenty of calcium powder and also that really good UVB bulb that we were talking about earlier. Now, as far as how much they eat, you would be surprised how much this little lizard can eat, especially when they're babies and they're growing up. They grow super fast. They reach full length in about 1 to 2 years. So they grow very, very quickly and they eat a whole lot. So usually what we do is we do about a 10 to 15 minute feeding of their protein, which are going to be the bugs, and we give them just about as much as they can eat in that one setting. So if they want, some days they'll eat a lot, some days they'll eat just a little, but you would be surprised about how many bugs they can eat. And now as far as salads go, you're just going to want to have a salad in their enclosure and ready for them whenever they need it, every day pretty much. They need access to these greens because if they get hungry, it's right there for them and they can eat it. Okay, and real quick, we're also going to talk about water for bearded dragons. Now, some people will tell you you want to put a water bowl in the bearded dragon's enclosure. This is a good practice to do just in case they want some water, but they're probably not very often going to drink from an actual water bowl. So instead, what we do is just every couple days, we'll mist down their enclosure or mist down actually on the bearded dragon, and they will drink up the little droplets of water that go in there. But they come from desert environments where they're not going to get a whole lot of water, and they actually get most of their water from their diet, so from all the greens that you're feeding them. Another thing you could do is also spray down the greens before you feed them, so there's little water droplets on the greens. And also, if you have a sick bearded dragon, or say a bearded dragon who just laid a clutch of eggs, you can even bathe them in just a small tub of water. You don't want them to be fully submerged in water, just enough that they can get their feet a little bit wet, and then they can drink water if they need to. But for the most part, you're not going to need water in the enclosure, and if you do, you're going to want to make sure that you change it out every day, because with them running around and digging, they're going to make the water very dirty very quickly. So a quick side note here, something I forgot to actually add while we were filming the video. So any water that you give your bearded dragon, you're going to want to supplement it with this reptile water conditioner. So basically what this is going to do is take any chlorine out of the water that can be dangerous to your animal. So you're going to want to make sure that you put this on any water that you're giving your bearded dragon, even if you're just misting them with it. Okay, the very last thing we're going to talk about is how to decorate your enclosure. Now, you can decorate your enclosure however you want, as long as it is suitable for your bearded dragon and functional. So what we do though is we like to create custom backgrounds for our animals with ledges and things like that that they can climb on. We also like to make it look very naturalistic, so we put a lot of driftwood and cork bark and things like that inside of the enclosure so they can climb around, and also some of that driftwood we put up higher in the enclosure so that way they can get up closer to their basking light and be a little bit warmer if they want to be. You're also going to want to make sure that you have places for them to hide in your enclosure. Somewhere on the cool side and on the hot side would be good. So one hide on the cool side and then one hide on the hot side. Just so that way they can get away and hide if they're feeling stressed out or anything like that. Another thing we'll do sometimes is we'll put in some leaf litter into the enclosure as well, just to, like I said, give it a more naturalistic look. But you can decorate your enclosure however you'd like we said, as long as it is suitable and good for your bearded dragon. So that's everything we have to talk about in our beginner's guide for bearded dragons. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the subscribe button below, and we'll see you in the next video.